Welcome back here on Beyond the Stats. I'm Tanner Camp alongside my partner, Zachariah Begley. So, Zach, the MLB and the MLBPA, they agreed on, stipulations for the return of the 2020 season, which was big for the MLB and potentially even for sports in general. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that and what those stipulations could mean for the league?
Yeah, so the stipulations are that players will get 170 million. I'm not like each player gets 170 million. There's 170 million dollars being broken up between the players that will cover May and April as an advance. And if the season happens, the money goes back, and then they'll get the regular salaries. If the season doesn't happen, they get to keep that money. A couple other things that are happening: if the season doesn't happen, players will get the same service time, which matters for players who haven't become free agents yet. And so they'll get the same service time, which means that as they got in 2019. So that means if they don't play at all this season, which is a thing that is slightly a possibility, it's in the plans, which means say you played 50 games in 2019, you will have the 2020 season will read in your service time as that you played the same amount of games in 2020. But if they play, obviously you get the service time for the games you played. A couple of other things that are happening are the draft will be shortened to 5 rounds for 2020, and then they'll do 20 rounds in 2021.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then another thing that's happening is they are not allowing any moves by any players. Or by any teams, excuse me. No moves by any teams until they agree when the season starts. So once the season starts, they can start making moves again. But there is a transaction freeze at the moment.
And some of the other parts that they have are looking through with this, assuming that this all goes through, is that they have certain conditions that have to be followed. So one is that there is no ban on any big mass gatherings that would limit the ability to play in front of those fans, but that could also be very different in terms of use of neutral sites. One of the other conditions is that there can't be any travel restrictions throughout the U.S. or Canada. And then also, this is probably the biggest one, is that the medical experts have to determine that there are no health risks for that. So very reasonable to have these conditions go through. They still want the best interest for the players, but there have been multiple people, players, other league officials that have said that by the end of the day, the players, they do want to play. And I think loads of other athletes in every sport around the world are saying the same thing. So the MLB kind of taking some steps to potentially get back to that. The NBA even touched a little bit that there's a chance for that. So I think this is a good step for baseball to hopefully get back into full swing, a very popular sport, and then maybe even show good signs and get those positive vibes that sports are going back in the right direction, that there is a chance for certain sports to resume their seasons and finish off. So I think this is great, not just for the MLB, but for all sports in general.
Yeah. So sort of the stipulations, I think that means, there's going to be no moves for the next until the start of the season, which seems a little crazy because if baseball seems to be moving players every other week, you see stars like Mookie Betts just get traded in baseball, and that doesn't happen in other sports.
Out of nowhere.
Slightly out of nowhere.
But it was a surprise.
For Mookie Betts, it wasn't like they've been talking about moving him, but not. So, but like players in baseball get moved all the time, even star players. Baseball's okay with moving players. A little bit more so than in football, especially. Big players don't really move for trades in football. Most of them get signed in free agency somewhere else, especially quarterbacks. When's the last time Jay Cutler's the last quarterback I think that got traded? That was a starter. And so baseball is okay with just moving players, unlike other sports. And the shortening of the draft is huge. Baseball has a lot of rounds, but they also have a lot of teams to fill, so it's understandable. So only having 5 rounds will mean a lot for minor league teams more than major league teams, because that means they'll have to sign more free agents to fill rosters. So players that normally would have sat out if the season happens will be able to play. So that's good for some players, but there'll just be less. Yeah. And then they're increasing the rounds next year to kind of make up for it, which makes sense. Um, the those those are the big ones. I mean, obviously, not saying we are not playing unless we can fill the stadiums is another huge one. That's probably the biggest one because that's going to make the season take longer to start. That's just the truth of it. It's going to make the season take longer to start because you are waiting for players to or for fans to be able to watch these games live.
Well, Zach, again, I think, even with all the stipulations, trying to keep the players safe but also try to bring those fans back. As you said, now that I think more about it, the fans are really important in this whole deal. Obviously the players' health and how they can play and they can find a way to make this work. But the fans are a big deal throughout this. But as a baseball fan myself, I really hope they can find a way to make this work. It would be great for everybody, but if they can find to make this work and hopefully get this season going back soon, it's going to be in the best interest for everybody.
Yeah, fans are the most important part of sports in a lot of ways. And I think it's really big for them to be able to go to games for players and for owners and for teams and for baseball in general.